Steve Harvey left the stage, walked toward the audience, and took off his jacket. What happened next made millions cry. It was supposed to be just another episode of Family Feud. Another family playing for money, another round of laughs, another typical Tuesday taping at the studio. But sometimes, the universe has other plans. Sometimes, in the middle of bright lights and game show bells, something breaks through the routine and reminds everyone watching why we're all here. This was one of those moments. The Johnson family stood at their podium wearing matching bright turquoise shirts. 5 of them: Marcus, the father with graying temples and tired eyes; Diane, the mother whose smile didn't quite reach her expression; 2 daughters in their 20s, and a teenage son who kept looking down at his shoes. They had made it to the final round, and the energy in the studio was electric. The audience clapped rhythmically, the way they always do. The cameras rolled. Steve Harvey stood at his podium with that signature grin, ready to deliver the punchlines that had made him a household name. But there was something different about this family. Something in the way they held each other. Something in the pauses between their answers. Something in the air that even Steve, with all his decades of television experience, could feel but couldn't quite name yet. Steve stopped mid-joke. The entire studio froze. They had just won $20,000. The board lit up with their final answer, and the audience erupted. Confetti should have fallen. Music should have blasted. The family should have jumped and screamed the way winners always do. But instead they stood there, holding each other, crying. Not tears of joy. Tears of something much deeper. Steve walked over, microphone in hand, ready to do what he always does: celebrate, joke, maybe dance a little. But when he got close enough to see their faces, really see them, he stopped. His smile faded. The seasoned entertainer, the man who had hosted thousands of episodes, suddenly didn't know what to say. "Congratulations, Johnson family," Steve started, his voice already softer than usual. $20,000. That's amazing. What are you going to do with the money? Marcus, the father, looked at his wife. She nodded. The daughters held their mother's hands. The teenage son wiped his eyes with his sleeve. And then Marcus spoke, his voice breaking with every word. "Steve, we're not keeping this money for ourselves. Every single dollar is going to Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. To the pediatric cancer ward. Because 3 months ago, our daughter Emma, their sister, lost her battle with leukemia. She was 7 years old." The studio went silent. Not the normal TV silence. Real silence. The kind where you can hear your own heartbeat. Steve Harvey, the man who always has a comeback, who always knows what to say, stood completely still. The microphone hung at his side. His eyes filled with tears. If you think this story can't get more powerful, subscribe now. Because what Steve did next changed not just this family's life, but the way millions of people see kindness. Nobody moved. The cameras kept rolling, but this was no longer a game show. The audience, 300 people who had come for entertainment, sat with hands over their mouths. Some were crying. A woman in the 3rd row had her face buried in her husband's shoulder. The producer in the control room whispered into his headset, "Keep rolling. Don't cut." Steve Harvey slowly walked back to his podium. But he didn't pick up his cards. He didn't make a joke. He didn't do any of the things the teleprompter told him to do. Instead, he put the microphone down, took off his jacket, that signature navy blue jacket he wears in every episode, and walked back to the Johnson family. "Can I hug you?" he asked Marcus, his voice barely above a whisper. Marcus nodded, and Steve wrapped him in an embrace that lasted almost a full minute. Then he hugged Diane. Then each of the children. The audience watched in absolute silence. This wasn't scripted. This wasn't planned. This was one human being responding to another's pain in the most basic, most profound way possible. Behind the scenes, Steve made a decision that defied every producer's expectation. He turned to the audience, tears streaming down his face, and did something he had never done in 20 years of hosting. He broke the 4th wall. He spoke directly to everyone watching. I need to tell you something, Steve said, his voice shaking. We do this show every week. We laugh, we play games, we give away money. And that's beautiful. But every now and then, God puts somebody in front of you to remind you what really matters. The Johnson family just lost their baby girl. 7 years old. And instead of keeping this money, instead of paying bills or taking a vacation or doing any of the 1,000 things they probably need to do, they're giving every cent to help other children fight the same battle their daughter lost. He paused, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. That's not just generosity. That's grace. That's love in its purest form. The audience began to stand. One person, then another, then the entire studio was on its feet, applauding. Not the polite applause of a game show audience. The kind of applause that comes from the soul, the kind that hurts your hands because you're clapping so hard. Steve walked over to the opposing family, the team that had lost. They were crying too. Come here, Steve said, waving them over. Come here right now. The Rivera family, still in their red team shirts, walked across the stage. Steve put his arm around both families. I'm going to do something I've never done, he announced. The Rivera family played their hearts out today. They don't deserve to walk away with nothing. So I'm matching the Johnson family's winnings. $20,000 to the Rivera family, and I'm personally donating another $20,000 to Children's Hospital in Emma's name. The studio erupted. People were sobbing, cheering, holding each other. A cameraman wiped his eyes with his sleeve. The floor manager's shoulders were shaking. Even the hardened production crew, people who had seen thousands of emotional moments, stood with tears running down their faces. But this is the moment no one in the studio, and no one watching at home, ever saw coming. Steve Harvey took off his jacket and handed it to Marcus Johnson. This jacket, Steve said, his voice thick with emotion, has been with me for every episode this season. It's seen a lot of wins, a lot of laughs. But today, it witnessed something bigger than any game show moment. I want you to have it. I want you to take it to the hospital. I want the kids there to know that somebody cares. That Emma's memory is going to help save lives. Marcus held the jacket like it was made of gold. Diane collapsed into her daughter's arms. The teenage son, who had been quiet the entire time, finally spoke. She loved this show, he said, his young voice cracking. Emma made us watch it every night during her treatment. She said Steve made her laugh when nothing else could. Steve Harvey, the comedian, the entertainer, the man known for quick wit and easy laughs, broke down. He sat right there on the stage floor, surrounded by both families, and cried. He didn't hide it. He didn't try to compose himself for the cameras. He just let himself feel it, let himself be human in front of millions of people. The episode was supposed to wrap up. There was a schedule, other families waiting, commercial breaks to consider. But the producer made a decision, let it breathe. Let this moment be what it needs to be. And so they stayed there, all of them, in a circle on the Family Feud stage, holding each other, crying together, healing together. When they finally stood up, Steve addressed the audience one more time. I don't know who needs to hear this today, he said, looking directly into the camera. But your pain has a purpose. Your loss can become someone else's hope. The Johnson family could have turned inward, could have let grief consume them. Instead, they turned it into light. They took the darkest moment of their lives and decided to help other families avoid the same darkness. He pointed at the family. That's heroic. That's what love looks like when it refuses to give up. The audience gave them a standing ovation that lasted 3 full minutes. Production tried to cut to commercial twice, but people kept clapping, kept crying, kept standing. The Johnson family stood there in their turquoise shirts, holding each other, holding Steve's jacket, holding on to hope. Share this story and subscribe. Make sure this moment is never forgotten. Because what happened after the cameras stopped will restore your faith in humanity. What the audience didn't see, what didn't make it into the broadcast, was what happened after they cut. Steve Harvey stayed. He didn't rush off to the next taping. He sat with the Johnson family in the green room for an hour. He called the hospital himself. He spoke to the head of the pediatric cancer ward. He committed to not just a donation, but to monthly visits, to bringing other celebrities, to making sure Emma's name would be on a new wing of the hospital. "I need you to understand something," Steve told Marcus and Diane in that quiet room, away from the cameras and the lights. "I've been blessed with this platform, with this opportunity to make people laugh. But today, you reminded me why I have it. It's not just for entertainment. It's for moments like this. It's for making sure that when someone is hurting, they don't hurt alone." He pulled out his wallet and gave Marcus his personal card. Not a business card. His actual personal phone number. "You call me," Steve said. "Anytime. 3 in the morning, I don't care. You call me. Because you're not carrying this alone anymore." The jacket became a symbol. Steve never wore it again. Instead, it hung in the children's ward at the hospital, signed by every family member, covered in messages of hope written by children fighting cancer. Kids would touch it before their treatments. Parents would pray over it. Nurses would point to it when a family was losing hope and say, "See that jacket? That's from the Johnson family. That's what love looks like." 6 months later, Steve returned to the hospital with cameras, but this time not for entertainment. For documentation. For proof that good things still happen. The Johnson family was there, volunteering every week in the playroom Emma used to love. They wore those same turquoise shirts, now faded from countless washings, and they held the hands of families just beginning the fight their family had lost. "Emma would have loved this," Diane told Steve, tears rolling down her cheeks as she watched her daughters read to sick children. "She always wanted to help people. Even at 7, she understood kindness in a way most adults never do." Steve filmed a follow-up segment that aired months later. The Johnson family's donation, combined with Steve's matching funds and the flood of donations from viewers, had raised over $2 million. A new treatment wing was being built. Clinical trials were being funded. Lives were being saved because one family chose to turn their grief into grace. "This is what happens when pain meets purpose," Steve said in that follow-up episode, standing in the hospital surrounded by families who had been helped by the fund. "This is what happens when someone says, 'My tragedy will not be in vain.'" The Johnson family didn't just win $20,000 on a game show. They started a movement. The teenage son, now a year older, spoke to the camera with a maturity beyond his years. "People ask me all the time if it was worth it, giving away the money. And I tell them, Emma's legacy isn't money. It's this. It's knowing that because she lived, because she fought, because our family chose to honor her this way, other kids get to live. Other families get to keep their daughters. That's worth more than any amount of money." Steve Harvey's jacket hangs in the hospital lobby now, in a glass case with a plaque that reads, "In memory of Emma Johnson. In honor of love that transforms pain into hope." Underneath is a photo from that day on Family Feud, Steve with both families, everyone crying, everyone holding each other, captured in a moment of pure, unfiltered humanity. The episode became the most watched Family Feud episode in history. Over 50 million views online. Shared across every platform. Translated into dozens of languages. But more than the views, more than the numbers, it sparked something. Hospitals across the country reported increases in donations. Families started foundations in their loved ones' names. People began to see grief not as an end, but as a beginning. Steve Harvey himself changed. Colleagues noticed it. His comedy still landed, his timing was still impeccable, but there was something deeper now. Something more intentional. "Meeting the Johnson family," he said in an interview months later, "reminded me that the platform I have isn't just about making people laugh. It's about making them feel. It's about showing them that in the middle of their darkest moment, they're not alone." And that jacket, hanging in that hospital, covered in the handprints of children who survived because one family chose love over grief? That's not just a piece of clothing. That's proof that even in our darkest hour, we can choose to be light for someone else. Emma Johnson never got to grow up. But her legacy did. And it's still growing today, one saved life at a time.